Hi everyone, I'm Hayley. I'm always in the craft room and I am here today to show you my new linen blouse. Now, as I've been setting up the camera, I have been thinking, oh, it doesn't really look like much on screen, but I've got to tell you, I absolutely love this. And you know what? It is supposed to be one of those garments that fades into the background, so the focus is on my gold fancy pants. So maybe it's achieving exactly what I wanted it to, or maybe I'll watch this back and think it looks fantastic. But either way, I absolutely love it. So the pattern is the top half of the République du Chiffon Dominique jumpsuit. You may recognise two previous versions I've made of the full jumpsuit, but I also made a blouse version a while back. Oh, my cable's magnetic. I made this blue chambray version by taking the pattern pieces, tracing them all off, and then the front pattern piece I altered, because if you look at the jumpsuit version, and I think this will be easier to see on the denim one, here we have pleats. Can you see those? And they are what give the bust shaping. Now, I didn't want pleats going into the hem of my blouse. I guess you could, but it's not really something you see, is it? So I looked up a tutorial and I rotated the bust shaping from the waist dart or pleat up to a bust dart. Now, I used a tutorial on YouTube. I don't know if I'll be able to find it again. If I can, I will link it, because I feel like it was very successful and the fit is great. But I will just say, if you are going to try something like that, which is very simple and actually at the end of the day it's just geometry, just be careful which tutorial you choose. Look for one from an established brand that you recognise, or someone that you know who's got industry expertise or training, because there are just so many dodgy tutorials out there showing you how to do things, and sometimes I watch them and I'm like, that's not how you do it. Anyway, I did it, it worked great, and I decided I'd like another one in white linen. This fabric is from Jenny Stitches. I cut it out probably a few months ago now, and my bad, before I cut it out, I didn't look that closely at this one and the construction. Now, I did know that the fit on this blue one was absolutely perfect, except for the placement of the pocket flaps. I'm gonna swap them over when I want to show you some internal details on this one. So you will get to see the fit of the blue one in a bit as well too. But I just feel like on the blue version, the pocket, they're not real pockets, the pocket flaps are slightly too far out. So I did remember to change that on this version. I just brought them in towards the center 1 centimetre more than this was. I think that might be 1.5 or even 2 centimetres closer than the pattern. I'm trying to look at the other ones. Anyway, if you do make this, check the pocket placement, because I felt like on this one they're kind of under my armpits rather than where I would like them to be. So I made that change in the sewing, but I didn't make any cutting out changes. This is the perfect length. I like the shirt tail hem. I love it, and so I just cut it out exactly as per the pattern pieces that I traced and altered for this one. And I shouldn't have. I should have looked at it more closely, because there are a couple of things that I wish I had changed at the cutting out stage. So the first one relates to the hem. So if you can see the hem on this garment, it is 7 millimeters maybe. I'm going to take the hanger away. It's overlocked, turned, stitched. That is it. It's like the skimpiest hem ever. And in this chambray, I don't think a little baby rolled hem would have been appropriate. I just want a proper decent hem, and yeah, this is not it. But because I cut this out without thinking about the construction, I only had 7mm hem allowance. So I wish I'd changed that earlier. I didn't, and I actually ended up doing this with a binding. I will come to that because it was complicated. The other change I wish I had made was to the armholes, because again, and this was my own fault, because obviously in the original pattern this should be attached to the trousers to make a jumpsuit. So I should have included more of a hem allowance. I think probably I was short of fabric, which was why I didn't. But this treatment on the armhole edge is as per the original pattern instructions, and it is to overlock and turn and stitch around the armhole. And I've got to be honest, I just think it looks a bit tatty. I don't like it. I don't think it looks particularly professional or nice. And it is what I've done on both jumpsuits and this version. But for this one, I decided I would rather do a binding. Now, when you go off script, like I often do, you are sometimes left to work things out by yourself. And what I am not great at doing is thinking through every step of the process far enough in advance. So, on this version, I did side seam slits, and actually I need them. They are a design feature, but they also give some of the ease that it needs to be worn, because I wanted a square, boxy shape. I didn't want an A-line, but also I need more room as I go outwards towards my hips. So these little side slits are both a design feature and actually necessary. So I wanted to press my seams apart so that I could top stitch around the bottom hem. Makes sense, yeah? So that's what I did. With this one, I overlocked all the side seams and then I sewed them together on the sewing machine, and then I pressed them open. And then I came to bind the armholes. And if I show you the inside of this, and will you forgive me, this blouse is a couple of years old and it's been well worn. So if it looks a little bit ropey, that's why. But when you turn and stitch around this armhole with the side seams pressed open, it works fine. They're not as pressed open as they once were. But can you see how the turn and the stitch, and you top stitch across there, and it all looks nice and neat, doesn't it? But what you might notice is what a steep point this armhole is. And I guess it's because it's a bit of a cut-on sleeve. If this were like a fitted shell top, probably the binding, the armhole would come in here and go around, and at the bottom it would make a round shape, a nice round shape that's easy to bind in a circle. But instead we're trying to bind like a teardrop shape. Yeah, I was a little bit flummoxed. What I'm going to do is put this blue one on and show you the insides of this one. But the other thing I just need you to quickly look at before we put this blue one on is the facing. So hold that thought about the teardrop shaped armholes while we quickly look at the original facing on this pattern, which is lovely and wide. And I've tucked it in to the hem down there. And I really like this. It works ever so well. You will also see that on this version, I've just sewn the buttons. My thread matches so well, I'm not even sure you can see. I have sewn the buttons all the way through on this one. I take it on and off over my head because I'm lazy and it fits fine. So I sewed these all the way through. So now we've got in our head a teardrop shaped armhole and very wide facings. I'm going to show you what's different about this white one. So here's my blue version, and I think it's always interesting to see how the same pattern looks in different fabrics. both wovens, but this one is much softer, partly because it's been washed so much, but also because it is a cotton. And yeah, I absolutely love this. Do you see what I mean about the flaps though? I just feel like they are too far out. So let's come back to these armhole bindings. So I wanted to use single fold binding, and by that I mean cutting a strip on the bias, pulling it through my metal bias tape maker and ironing folds either side, and then I stitched it along the crease to the right side of the armhole, flipped the whole thing in to top stitch it down. So I started off with one long strip of bias from the self fabric, and I attached it to the right side, starting like 5 centimeters away from the bottom and finishing 5 centimeters away from the bottom, so that I could then join it into a circle after matching, like crossing them over and matching exactly where they were. And that worked really well. And then I flipped it all to the inside and got ready to top stitch. And that's when I hit, problems is a strong word. That's when I realised that this is a very tight point, and there's too much tension. I have clipped into the seam, I've clipped into the binding, and I've clipped into the garment, and yeah, you can see it just wants to flip out. Now, look, who's looking that hard under my arm? No one. It's absolutely fine. I just wish I had thought a little bit more about the side seam and the binding and which order to do them in. I wonder if it would have been better to bind the armhole while the side seam was open and then press those bindings apart and overlock, if that makes sense. I do have another top that has this same cut-on sleeve arrangement leading to a really sharp point, and that comes with a facing. It's a crazy shape facing. It's like nothing I'd ever seen before, and now I know this is why, because it's very hard to bind something that comes to that point. Anyway, lesson learned, and I do think it looks absolutely fine. So having bound the armholes, I started thinking about the hem, and I decided that because I'd left myself such a skimpy hem allowance, I did want to bind the hems, because I just felt like a chunkier, weightier, thicker hem would look much better on this fabric. The back of the garment does have quite a pronounced curve, so I knew that I would need bias binding for this, and I did it in a much thicker width than the stuff I used for the armhole. I just thought that would look nicer, and I have a full set of bias binder makers, so I can cut any width and make it as I please. However, once it came to these two front parts, I knew that they were basically just cut on the cross grain. And by now I was really down to scraps of fabric. So I decided actually to just cut strips on the normal straight and cross grain rather than bias strips, because they don't need to curve around anything. They're literally just going straight. And I did have some strips. I think when I made my previous two tops from this same cut of fabric, I think maybe I cut some length off one of them, and I think that's what it was, because they were just in my scraps pile, but they were basically perfect for what I needed. Now when it came to the facing and the side seam and the top stitching, I did do an awful lot of head scratching, because I knew I wanted to like tuck things in, but I didn't know which order to do it. Did I want the facing covering the hem, or the hem covering the facing, and the same at the side seams? And I actually went for opposites. It was just what seemed to lay best. I kind of tried both ways pinning it, and this was what worked best. The facing going over the binding, oof, that took a few goes. I laid it all how I thought it should be, and with the facing and the front, I was like, I flipped the facing out to the right sides and sewed along it to turn it and give me this corner, but I kept getting the binding in the wrong bit, so it was like poking out of the middle. I pinned it, I flipped it, I changed it. I pinned it, I flipped it, I changed it again. Pinned it, flipped it, checked it, it was right, basted it, it worked. Sewed it, went to do it on the other side and pinned it incorrectly in exactly the same way as I did on the first side, like 3 times. I could not get my head around that. But anyway, it all worked out in the end, except it didn't, because you might notice that the facings on this white one are very much narrower than they are on the blue version. So I mentioned this last week, it was maybe in my Friday sews video, that I was worried about the facings showing through, like shadowing, and I just really don't like it. It is somewhat inevitable on a white blouse, isn't it? But I didn't want it to be any more obvious than what it had to be. So I made a renegade move and I didn't interface my facing. Whew, I think this might be the first time I've ever not done that. And you know what? It's fine. Because this is a hefty, stiff fabric. Maybe it won't hold up as well, I'm not sure. But for the time being, I'm happy with that choice. However, once I had the hem done and I went to try the blouse on, I found that the facing was very obvious through the front of the garment. I have taken a picture and I will insert it to see if you can see what I saw. Because to me, at a glance, it was just very distracting. Front and center, this glowing, thick facing, and I didn't love it. I also didn't want to change the facing and have to unpick all those hems that I had spent ages doing. So I decided to sleep on it, and come the cold light of day, I decided it would look better if I narrowed the facings so that they looked more like a button placket. So on this blue one, because you can't see through this fabric at all, you don't know, but the facing is like here. And I just thought if I narrowed it so that it was the width of the overlap, which is 3 centimetres, from the front at a glance, it would have the appearance more of a button placket than an obvious showing through facing. Now, maybe only sewers even know what a facing is and would notice this, but also even before I sewed, I do remember seeing white garments where you could see pockets through them or seam allowances and thinking that it didn't look good, so maybe not. Anyway, here is what it looks like now. You overlap these two by exactly 3 centimetres. So I've narrowed the facing to 3 centimetres, and I think at a glance that looks much more like a placket. The other reason it was really obvious was because where the facing comes along here, it was right on the curve of my bust line. It was very front and centre, and yeah, it just looked too obvious to me. So anyway, I decided I did have to do something about it. So what I did was I unpicked the hem that I had so painstakingly got right and already top stitched, and I did such a good job of the top stitching. I pulled long thread tails. I started off at one side, I went around, up, down, all the way around the bottom, up, down, all the way back to the other end, and then I left long thread tails and then I pulled them through to the wrong side and knotted them. I was so pleased with that top stitching. Anyway, I had to cut it because the original facing was 7 centimetres wide, so it was about yay wide. So I opened it up, got the facing free. The back facing, the back neck facing, they do instruct you on the pattern to stitch down, and I had done that and I didn't want to mess with that. I was perfectly happy with that. So basically, from this shoulder seam, I actually turned the whole thing inside out and marked it all with a aqua trick marker. I love these things, they're so good. I have noticed not all of my markings have come off yet, but they do just disappear with water. They're absolutely my favourite marking tool, especially for white fabric. Anyway, I turned the garment inside out and I marked down both facings so they were exactly equal, and I did really painstakingly measure them at loads of different points to make sure that they were exactly the same. And then I actually, and this was so brave of me, I went straight in with the overlocker whilst it was still attached to the garment and just whizzed half the facing off. I took it down from 7 centimetres to 3 centimetres, and the reason I did it straight on the overlocker rather than trimming along the edge and then trying to put it through the overlocker is that I just find I get a much neater edge if the overlocker cuts and sews. So I am pleased with how it worked out. I went very slowly and made sure to keep the rest of the blouse way out of the way, and it worked fine. And then I had to go back and work out this arrangement with the facing and the binding all over again. And honestly, altering the facing when the garment was 95% done, it probably took me 2 hours. But thrilled to say, I honestly think it makes all the difference. I look at this now and it is just the perfect classic white linen blouse. I absolutely love it. And even though I spent a couple of weeks on it, and all that time, I'm really pleased I did, because all of these little details, like binding the arms rather than turning and stitching, and being really fussy about this facing, honestly, I do think they elevate garments to just looking fabulous. And individually, you probably never notice any of them, but overall, the crisp, clean look to me is totally worth it. And you know what? Sewing's my hobby and I enjoy it. So it's annoying to have to unpick because I'm always worried about wrecking the fabric. But you know what? Having to restitch a hemline, I love top stitching. It's just more sewing I get to do. And I think I did a really neat job, even with the second set of top stitching, and you can't tell it's been altered at all. Now, one word of caution about the narrowing of the facing. This facing actually forms the collar. So this is the jumpsuit version. And if I flip the collar up, you will see that this, you probably can't see because this is so creased. This is the front of the garment. This is cut to the front piece. And then you sew the facing to it, flip it open, and this collar bit is actually formed from the facing. Yes, so the facing fabric is on the outside. So this is important for 2 reasons. Firstly, I was tempted to try and control the collar by stitching in the ditch along this line on the white one. I thought, oh, that will keep the collar perfectly in place. Thankfully, before I did it, I realised that when you flipped it, you would have been able to see the stitching. So I'm very glad that I didn't do that. But the other reason it is important that the facing forms the collar is that because I narrowed this facing so much, the facing wanted to flip out here because it's not particularly deep. To remedy that, I have just hand stitched it to the seam allowance here, and I could do some more hand stitches elsewhere if I wanted to, but what I have found is that if I set it right, it stays. But yeah, just something to bear in mind if you're going to go around altering facings. Just think about whether they're like a true facing, like this one that's always on the inside, or whether they actually form part of the garment. In fact, you can probably see it better on here. That's just the top front yoke, and then the facing flips out to form the collar. This collar installation was quite tricky. This was my 4th go at it, and I still found it difficult. However, I love the shape of this collar. I just really, really like it. So once I had the facing, the width I wanted, hand stitched down, and all the other details right, I just needed to do buttons, and I agonised over that. I really did. I had a look in the button stash and I had quite a few options that would have worked. I actually had more of these buttons. These are Jaeger branded. I can see it stamped on them. So I've obviously cut them off some ready to wear that I recycled. And I also had some, was it Hobbs buttons? Very similar. No, it was Gant. Shirt buttons that were white, and I was like, either of those. But actually, once I put them on a white garment, it was very obvious that they were yellow, cream, but really not bright white. So I really looked at lots of options. I considered wooden buttons, which, if you know me, you will know I love a wooden button. In fact, this jumpsuit has wooden buttons, and I had some very similar to that I really nearly used, but in the end I just found that they were quite attention grabbing. They were very high contrast. I also had some little shiny shank buttons that were pearlescent. I have got a photo of all the buttons, so I will insert it and you can tell me if you think I chose the wrong ones. I polled my family and my husband did say he preferred the shiny buttons, but I just felt with this very round collar, the shiny pearly buttons were making it lean too twee and cutesy, and I was just looking for kind of like basic but beautifully executed. So I chose the plainest, most boring white buttons. I actually love them. They're really very flat, although I thought they were completely flat until I came to pick them up off the desk, and then I realised that one side had a slight, ever so slight dome, and they rocked on the table, and the other side was completely flat. So even though they looked the same, there still was a back and a front. So I'm glad I noticed that, although probably you never would notice if I'd got some on back to front. I then had my next debate, which was, am I sewing the buttons straight through like this? And I came to the conclusion, no, I didn't want to take this on and off over my head. And I'll tell you why. If it's white linen weather, for me, it's also Factor 50 sun cream weather. I can find sun cream that doesn't mark my clothes, and I can find sun cream that doesn't irritate my skin. I can't find one sun cream that achieves both of those things. So unless I want to be itchy and uncomfortable all day, my sun cream it doesn't stain clothes, but it just makes them look grubby and dingy. And yeah, I didn't want to be taking this on and off over my head and dragging these sleeves up along my arms, which always have a lot of sun cream on. So actually, my husband suggested that I do poppers again. Hang on. Both of these jumpsuits have buttons, but really they're poppers. I don't know if you can see in this crazy print. I have machine sewn on actually that popper, and then on the other side I machine sewed on the other side of the popper, and then I hand stitched a decorative button over the top. And this is amazing for a jumpsuit. I think the original instructions call for snaps. I don't trust snaps at all in the least. I've had too many ready to wear snaps fail me. So this solution means you get the look of buttons, which I like, the security of snaps, which even if they come unstitched, aren't going to tear a hole in your garment. And it's so quick and fun to just out of it. Quick, easy to do up as well. So absolutely ideal for a jumpsuit where you do have to take it on and off every time you need to use the facilities. So my husband suggested that I do that again on this blouse, and I did think about it, but what I decided was it might just be a little bit visible on such a plain blouse. If I show you the denim version, from the front it's just buttons, isn't it? But if you were to look down the side, I use metal ones on this one. You can see. Now, it doesn't bother me at all on this. No one's ever noticed. In fact, the first time my husband saw me take one of these off, his mind was blown. He thought I was like ripping all the buttons off. But I just thought for a blouse, I didn't want that. And also, I don't need to be able to take it off quickly. I just need to be able to take it off by opening it rather than taking it over my head. So, drum roll please, I actually sewed real buttonholes. I know. Oh, I did not enjoy it. I've got to say though, the reason I started sewing straight through things was because my old sewing machine could not do an automatic buttonhole to save its life. It just could not do them. And I always ended up having to restitch them using a manual zigzag, and they looked terrible. So I started stitching through things whenever I could get away with it. And then I realised, you know what? I prefer taking things on and off over my head anyway. It's much quicker. So I don't even know how many buttonholes I've done on this machine, but possibly because this is such a nice crisp linen, possibly just because it is a wonderful machine, this did every single buttonhole absolutely perfectly. These ones I did just sew straight through between you and me. I painstakingly marked the button placement, and that is another change that you will notice from the blue one. I'm looking for it, but I'm wearing it. So this blue one has got 5 buttons, and I did that because I just learned as a rule, probably in art at school or design technology, that when you're dealing with a grouping of something, odd numbers looks better. Flower arranging, like whatever, always shoot for an odd number. So on this one, I did 5. When I came to do this one, I will admit I didn't know which way to sew the buttonholes, whether to do them vertical or horizontal. And the markings on my pattern were for poppers. So there is no vertical or horizontal. So I got out my trusty Vogue sewing book, which I would show you, but actually it's propping the camera up a little bit higher than usual because I wanted you to be able to see the whole blouse, so I can't. But it has a whole section on the placement of buttonholes, and it told me to do them vertically, and it also said something I didn't know but makes perfect sense. It said the bottom button should never be more than 7.5 centimetres from the hem. Between 7.5 and 10, it said, was ideal. If you look at this one, because I just did the placement myself, there's one right down there, and now I know that looks really off to me. I wouldn't have spotted it before, but now I know this placement is much better, and it sits better because the opening at the hem comes up, and then it just overall the whole garment sits and lays better. And also it solved another problem, which was I only had 6 of these buttons and I needed some for the pocket flaps, so I just did 4, and I think it looks great. I placed the first one at the fullest part of my bust so that there was no gaping. I placed the bottom one 7.5 centimetres up because this is quite a crop blouse, so I thought 7.5 centimetres was about right. And as we all know, I have a very short torso. And then I just evenly spaced the other ones using my stretchy Sim Flex guide. I hope you know what I mean, but I will put a picture in, because if you haven't got one of those and you regularly place buttons, I would highly recommend it. So it's actually good fun to use, but also it means they're really accurate. And I placed them 15 millimeters in from the edge, which was the center of this button placket, as per the instructions in Vogue. And yeah, I just really took my time over the placement, because another reason I don't like doing buttonholes is because if you then get the spacing of the buttons slightly wrong, it can cause it to like bunch up a bit, do you know what I mean? Or pull down. So I spent ages marking the buttonholes. I sewed them all, and then I laid it all out and I marked through the buttonhole with my aqua trick marker to mark where I wanted the buttons. I checked the spacing again. I made sure they were all the right distance in, and I'm really pleased with how flat that is sitting. I really think, I mean, it looks basically like I sewed them through, doesn't it? There's no fighting between button and buttonhole at all. So I think that is all the details of my blouse. Everything else is exactly per the instruction, joining this yoke, the back yoke, all of the top stitching. I do think if I made another one of these, which there's every chance I will, it would be cute, instead of cutting the back on the fold and laying it on the fold, to just extend the fabric past the fold a bit and then do either a pleat or some gathers here. I think that would look really nice, and it would also mean that there was more ease in the back, and potentially I wouldn't have to do the side slits, even though I do like that detail, or I could leave it in just as a design element, but it wouldn't be needed so much for the function. Overall, I'm just absolutely thrilled with it. I think it is beautiful, an absolute wardrobe staple, and I'm really glad I took my time over it and did everything to the best of my ability. The collar is not as round as I would like. I can always find holes to pick in something, but I really do think it is some of my best work. I would love to hear in the comments below, did you notice the difference in the number and placement of the buttons? And do you think the 4 is an improvement over the 5, especially this bottom one? Now it's been pointed out to me, yeah, I do think this looks off. And actually, because these are sewn straight through and there are no buttonholes, I could change them. I hope to see you again soon, and I'll let you know if I ever get round to it. Bye. I've just spotted a little thread, do excuse me.